Now, just want to rehash what I just said. So I'm going to provide a kind of quick refresh of the contract due diligence training that I provided in January for Community Connector grantees. So this is to remind us all of the requirements for Community Connector grantees to prepare for Minnesota housing monitoring as well as potential federal monitoring as well. So Graydon is here to answer questions. Afterwards, you can reach out to Graydon. He's your first point of contact. I can also help support, and we will send out a follow-up email too with a link to the written procedures as well as just where to follow up with questions. And then just a quick ask to mute yourself if you're not talking so that we can avoid feedback, but feel free to jump in and ask a question as you need to. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right, Graydon, can you confirm that you can see the PowerPoint?
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you. All right, just a quick reminder that we're recording, and stay on mute unless you have a question. Feel free to jump in. Okay, so we're going to be covering contract and program requirements. So just a quick overview that both state and federal requirements apply to this funding, to the Community Connector funding, and that monitoring may happen by both state or federal teams. The requirements are significant, and so I encourage you to ask for clarification today or as things come up. Please do ask questions, ask clarification. First point of contact is Graydon here on this call. Graydon, if you want to pop your email in the chat, that would be great. And then Graydon will send a follow-up email as well. We do have written procedures for all of this information. We'll send you a link to those afterwards. We sent those in January, I believe, but that's been a while. And again, Graydon's here. I'm here to support you too. All right, so if you recall, you all have a work plan and budget that are exhibits of your contract, and that really guides your work. So just a reminder that you should be performing all your activities as outlined in those work plans and budgets. And so when we receive your invoices, we are referencing back to those work plans and those budgets. Several, if not all of you, have revised your budgets. And so we have those on file. And so we are reflecting back to your revised budgets when you send your invoices in. So as you prepare your invoices and as you're doing your work, that's what you should be looking at too. Are you doing your work within that work plan and within your revised budget? If not, your activities and your expenses are likely ineligible. And so that's what you should be basing your work plans off. If there are changes anticipated, reach out to Graydon to talk those through before you change your work plan or your budget. I would recommend this is a good time to take a look at that work plan, take a look at that revised budget or whatever your most recent budget is that was approved by us. After this meeting, just take a quick look at it. Is it still right? Do you need to make changes to it? This is a good time to do so. So just take some time to look at it. And then if you think changes are needed, I would set up a meeting with Graydon to discuss. And then again, just a reminder that invoices that you submit need to tie back to the work plan and budget. So if you are submitting an invoice that includes mileage for travel, then that should be in your budget that you submitted and also included in your contract. So that's what we're looking for when you submit invoices. If that's not in your work plan or budget, that's when you're going to get an email from Graydon asking for questions or clarification, and it's possible that it would be considered ineligible if those things don't line up. We want them to line up, right? We want it to work for you. So contact us ahead of time if you think that your work plan or budget needs to change. And because this program has been a roller coaster, we anticipate things will need to change. So let's figure that out ahead of time so that we can approve your invoices um, because we make changes to your budget or work plan. So we just have to do that ahead of time so that there aren't surprises. Any questions there on work plan and budget? One thing I wanted to mention, when we were talking about the program being condensed to 30 days, we talked about amending contracts to include additional work. That is still on the table. If you all feel like there's a need for additional work, we do feel strongly that we need your help getting applicants in the door to submit applications through, I would say likely our prediction right now is through March of this year. So at the present moment, we're feeling like the scope of work isn't necessarily changing. We had talked about adding scope of work to include doing some work around referring folks to housing counseling. If you're interested in adding that scope of work now, we could talk about it. But I've kind of just let that sit for now because we do still need your help with the outreach. So if you're interested in doing some sort of a contract amendment to increase your scope of work, why don't you go ahead and reach out to Graydon to start that conversation? But if you're fine just staying with the outreach work and can continue that scope of work as is, we could certainly use your help continuing that work. Any questions there? All right. So subgrantees, let's see. Sharon, I think you're the only one on this call today with subgrantees, and we've covered this quite a bit. Just a reminder that all of the requirements I'm talking about here today also trickle down to your subgrantees, and that stair step is responsible for making sure they comply too. So let us know if you have questions on that, but I think we've had conversations about that. Contracting and bidding, we talked a lot about this in January and February. Just a reminder that there is a contracting and bidding process that you have to comply with. Um, if you are going to add any additional contractors or vendors, you do have to go through that suspended and debarred check. So since our program is running longer, think about that if you're adding any vendors. So that includes printers, copiers, contractors, anyone like that. So if you recall, you sent me a list at the beginning of the program with your vendors. So if you're adding any new vendors, small, large, any new folks, send those people to Graydon and confirm for your records. You need to keep records of this, that you've done a suspended and debarred check. A reminder that you do a SAM check on that sam.gov and a Minnesota Housing debarred check. Those are required. You save your screenshots in your files. And then if you are monitored by Minnesota Housing or the federal government, they want to see those screenshots. So those you have to save in your records. We did a tutorial of that back in January. We could do it together if you need to add a vendor. Just a reminder of that. You need to do that for each new vendor you add. Questions on that? All right, here's a reminder. I'll send these slides too of where you have to check for the suspended and debarred. A reminder that you don't have to send us the screenshots, but you do have to have those in your files. All right, data practices. The state and federal data practices requirements apply to you as grantees and then also to subgrantees. So you do have to provide the Tennyson or private data notice to individuals before collecting private or confidential data. And we talked about this many months ago, but private data is broadly defined for this program. So it can include emails, that's included as a private data, a name, a photo of someone is private data. And so my recommendation early in the program is to avoid collecting that data unless you determine it's completely necessary. So if you do sign-in sheets, that would be private data. So you would have a Tennyson warning and data practices warning available on the same table that you're doing on the sign-in sheet. You can also have it as part of your PowerPoint. And so I have that information that I can resend to you all, but that is something you have to have as part of that data collection. And so I have templates that I can resend to you all, but it's something you just need to do as part of your practice if you're collecting any sort of data. So if you're doing door knocking and you're collecting emails for an email list, you do have to do a data practices and Tennyson notice to folks. Questions on that? Okay. A reminder that also applies to subgrantees. And then another reminder, if you receive a request to release data, notify Graydon. So this might come in the form of a reporter contacts you about the program because they're doing a story and they say that they want you to release data per the public data request. Don't do anything, acknowledge it, let us know. That is the process there. Makes sense? All right, and then reporting fraud. So unfortunately, fraud is a part of any program like this. If you suspect fraud or if someone notifies you of suspected fraud, please report it through our ethics point phone number or to our chief risk officer, and then they will investigate it. And then record retention, because you all are not administering the program itself, there's not a lot of private data to retain, but you do need to retain your program files, for example, your contract, you know, you're suspended and debarred, checked, all of your evidence that you fulfilled your due diligence on the program. You need to maintain that for 6 years from the end of the contract. So whenever you end the contract, we'll see when that date is, 6 years from the end of that date. So something just to keep in mind. So, you know, I recommend you have your files in really great shape right now, and then, you know, we end the contract at some point in the future. 6 years from then is when you can get rid of the file. And just a note that all the documents are subject to examination by Minnesota Housing, the state of Minnesota, the state auditor, the legislative auditor, and the U.S. Department of Treasury. All right, invoicing and reporting. I feel like we're old pros at this, but just a reminder that the requirement is to submit your invoice each month on the 15th through CVent. And a reminder that all of your program expenses, such as, you know, paying for Zoom or paying for your materials for your outreach events, all of those need to have a cost code associated with them so that you can document that you're tracking the federal funds separately. So in QuickBooks, this is setting up a separate cost code. And for example, you would be coding your program expenses with a specific code. So if I was setting up my QuickBooks, I might pick a code like HHMN, Home Help Minnesota, and track all of my program expenses that way. So when my audit came up, I could pull up a report by the code HHMN, pull up all of those program expenses, print that out for my audit, be good to go. So that's what those, especially federal auditors, are looking for. Can you track all of the federal fund expenses separate than all of your other organization expenses? That's the test they're going to be doing on you. So that's something important to do right away. I would say that's your takeaway today, in addition to all things, is your accounting system set up that way? If not, talk to whoever does your accounting, that might be yourself, and then ask us if you have questions. You may not have QuickBooks, you may have something else, but that's the one that I used most recently. Questions on that? Either you all are asleep or you're just on it and good to go. I'm going to assume you're on it. All right, travel expenses. Some of you have travel expenses including in your contract. A reminder that the rate went up in July, so you can now charge 62 cents, 62.5 cents per mile for mileage. Just a reminder, you have to have that included in your contract to be able to get reimbursed for travel. So that was negotiated as part of the contract assignment, and that it's only for mileage. The reimbursement has to be for mileage, and it has to be at this rate, documented in writing. So it's a pretty rigid reimbursement.